Hey folks, today I want to talk about 7 games that I'm really excited about being released in the rest of 2020. Now, generally, what I tend to do is collect all the games that I'm really curious about into this one sort of list on Board Game Geek, which is a collection of games that I want to buy. So, this just helps me curate those games that I'm interested in. Every time I see a game that I'm interested in, I add it to the list. And you can see there's quite a few here that I'm interested in. Some of them have already been released. Some of them I need to kind of remove from this list. But today I want to talk about the top 7 that I'm really interested in. This isn't exactly in kind of most to least interested or least to most interested order. It's just sort of I'm going to go through the 7 that I think are really at the kind of top of the list for me. So I'm going to kick things off with a game called Beyond the Sun. Now this just shot onto the list just a couple of weeks ago or a week or so ago when I saw the heavy cardboard playthrough. And I really love the space theme here. It feels like a very sort of nice kind of classical style Euro game. Where you're kind of, you've got a faction, you've got a board with different chits and tokens that you're going to be moving and leveraging in both a kind of a worker placement way, but you're also going to be looking at building up tech trees and action drafting. So a lot of that kind of classical Euro meaty goodness baked in, and it's that great space theme, which I'm a massive fan of. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I think if you want to find out more about this one, do check out the heavy cardboard playthrough. It really looks like a pretty sweet game, so I'm quite curious about that one. The next one I'm really curious about is Maglev Metro, and this is by the designer of Suburbia, although it's a very different game. It's a sort of a network building game. It's a competitive game where you're going to be building out these kind of futuristic train lines, I believe in New York or Berlin. There's 2 sides to the board, and what's really kind of interesting about this is they have clear see-through tiles that you're going to be using to build your stations out. So you can actually see, like here, you can actually have different lines going through the same station, which is quite cool the way they've designed that with these clear tiles that can be used. And you're going to be delivering passengers to and from these different locations to gain points. I think it's a relatively sort of straightforward game, but I don't really have that many route building and network building or pick up and deliver games. So I'm kind of quite curious about this one. It just has a really nice futuristic vibe to it, and I like the production quality. There's an overview video here on BGG you can check out, which is quite helpful. The next game I'm quite curious about is a game called Furnace, and this is by a Russian designer and publisher, I believe. Let's just actually check where the designer is from. Let's see. Doesn't actually say, I don't believe. Yeah, Russian board game. Okay, cool. So let's go back and take a look at this one. So not too much known about this one. There is a gameplay overview video here which is worth checking out. And it seems to have quite a few different mechanisms in here with auction and bidding at its heart. And it's interesting that it's a 2-player and up game, because a lot of times with bidding games, you can't play 2 players. You need 3 players minimum. So that's kind of interesting to see. It looks like quite a few moving pieces here, but it does have kind of a nice vibe to it, and I'm curious to see how they actually pull this all together. So it's, I think, being sort of positioned as a game that offers a lot of bite but is not overly complex. There you go, an astounding engine building Euro where the players take on the roles of 19th century industrialists, blah blah blah. So yeah, that should give you kind of the general idea of the setting, but it looks like kind of an interesting combination of mechanisms together, and it is, for better or for worse, a sort of a theme that I quite enjoy as well. Despite all the horrors of the industrial era, it's a theme that I quite enjoy in board games, especially when you have engine building and worker placement there, and as well as auction and bidding in this case. The next game is another one that's quite recently shot onto this list, and it looks like a much lighter game where you're essentially trying to build out stone patterns, so to speak, with these tiles, and you're using a deck of cards to manipulate those stones to create patterns that you can score with. And I think there's the kind of key sort of tension in the game is that you use these cards to both score points, but then you have to sacrifice a card if you want to reconfigure the shape or the placement of the stones to actually match the scoring patterns that you need. So there's kind of that interesting push and pull. It looks like a nice kind of small form family weight game, which is really interesting. So I'm definitely keeping my eyes out on this one. There's a cool little overview video, and honestly, within a few minutes, I think you'll kind of get the joke, so to speak. But yeah, it looks like a really interesting one. The next game is one that I've actually pre-ordered. It's a midweight game from Alexander Pfister, which offers deck building, pool building, bag building, and it's got this cool steampunk Zeppelin theme, which I really dig. And it's supposed to have kind of an interesting card crafting mechanism. I guess something similar to a game like Mystic Vale, which I thought was a really cool game with a really cool sort of mechanic. And you can see here from the board and the components that it looks like there's some kind of interesting stuff going on. I'm really just interested in that sort of the fact that it's a midweight, lighter Alexander Pfister game, which I think he does actually quite well. So I don't know a huge amount more than that. I don't think the rule book is actually even being released. There doesn't seem to be any overview videos, so it's it's kind of just snippets here and there. But that's one I'm kind of so interested in that I've sort of bought it sight unseen because of the designer pedigree and also because the publisher pedigree. Capstone Games is something that I really do trust in. And finally, another game by a pretty well-established publisher, Czech Games, and this looks like a really interesting kind of, again, midweight Euro game with card play at the core. It's one of those kind of themes where if you grew up in the 80s and you watched Indiana Jones like I did, you probably have an affinity for those sort of exploration, themes, something like you may have seen in Quest for El Dorado. But this looks like it has like a nice bit of deck building where you can kind of augment your deck with better equipment and better abilities, and you're exploring different locations, trying to gain points as you go through that. There's a couple of really good overview videos and playthrough videos you can watch to get a feel for it. But just I think the theming and that kind of nice midweight level of complexity here is something that really appeals to me. Also seems to be a solo option here as well, which is quite cool. So those are the 7 games that I'm really, really looking forward to in the rest of 2020. I'm not exactly sure when all of these will be released. I think in the current state of the world as it is with, all of our big board gaming events and shows shifting to digital versions, it's kind of hard to understand exactly how that impacts release schedules for games. But I am, going on the fact that BGG has listed these games as a 2020 release. So yeah, hopefully there will be some here that you're interested in. I'd be curious to understand which games you're interested in if they're not on this list. And by all means, drop some comments here on the video or just hit me up on Twitter @GameMinimalist. And I guess in the meantime, enjoy your gaming and stay safe.